Next speaker, Adaora, is a bit of a polymath. She's got a whole bunch of different interests, and she's obviously a person with a lot of diverse background and interests. And today she's going to talk about how in an organization some of those diverse interests collide and interact, and how do you turn an organization and a culture into something that works together? Because very often our organizations are structures and have this kind of static feel about them, whereas our cultures are organic and they kind of emerge on their own. How do you blend those things and how do you make them work? So put your hands together for Adaora.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
I'm really excited to be here. I'm still so moved by that last talk, so give me a moment to kind of settle myself. I just wanted to say a couple of things. Richard grabbed me before this talk and he was like, well, how should I, how should I kind of bring you out? And I just wanted to say one of my favorite things about living in Boston is because Fresh Tool Soil and Richard lives here. Because they create events like this and continue to inspire me, and I'm sure many of you, to keep pushing the boundaries of what we do. So thank you, Richard, for having me. And thank you, all of you, for entertaining me, I guess. OK, so full confession. I looked at the list of topics today about like a week ago. And I saw the topic was like org culture as product. And I was like, that's quite nebulous. And I couldn't actually remember what it is that I was supposed to be speaking about, because it's so broad. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to tell you what I'm not going to speak about today. So the very first thing is that this is not a session where a black woman comes up here and tells you how to do better. Like, this is not that talk. The second is I'm not going to make the case for diversity that we've all read the articles. We've all seen the rants on Medium. We all know we make a ton of more money if our teams are diverse, yada, yada, yada. Right? OK. I'm also not going to make a moral argument. So this is also not a talk about reaching into the light within and remembering that we have daughters and husbands and gay friends that helps us plan our weddings and people that we should care about as we're designing our teams. And I also don't have an answer for how we create cultures, which is kind of awkward to say at the beginning of the talk. But I just wanted to be clear that that's kind of like where I'm at today. Cool? OK. But I do have an idea. I have an idea I would love to share with you. But before I do that, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about me, because I think it'll contextualize my philosophy advice, so to speak. So this is me. I'm originally from Nigeria, if you can't tell by my wavering in and out funny accent. I've been building bridges since I was literally about 5 years old. That is a picture of me. Can you guess which one I am, by the way? Yeah, that's me. That was, I believe, my 8-year birthday party. My mom had a really weird sense of humor. I was supposed to look like Minnie Mouse. And I was searching for my class picture because I went to a British school in Nigeria. And so in my class photos, it's like me and one other unfortunate black girl, and then like a sea of white people. And then there were other classes that kind of had people, diplomats, ambassadors, et cetera. And everyone's birthday parties were kind of boring and looked like a monolith, but mine rocked. I had so many different people show up and have kind of grown up with that spirit, right? Growing up in Africa, growing up in Lagos, leaving to come to school in the US, moving back to Nigeria, living in South Africa, I've kind of built a very, very wide and varied community of people and identities. And I'm constantly translating between all of them. So that's a little bit about me. Second is that I wear 3 hats quite consistently. So by day, and for most of my career, I have worked in technology, so have always worked in software. I had a short stint in kind of impact, kind of innovation incubator type space when I was working in Nigeria. For the most part, have worked in technology. After work, or by whenever I had time, I was also building social movements and have always been a very concerned, active, engaged citizen of the world. So as an example, I founded an organization that was for LGBT women of color who are interested in getting access to more professional networking opportunities and job opportunities in Boston. At the time when I founded it, the people were like, there's none of you here, there's probably you and like one other person. By the time I grew the organization, there were about 2,000 people in it. We were partnering with businesses and healthcare organizations across the state, and it was awesome. And I did this while having a full-time job. So I've kind of always been like that. I've kind of always worked and been able to learn from work and learn from product and strategy and all of those things, but also had like a playpen via my own organizations and things I was doing outside of work to practice. And so the lines between my professional and my I guess somewhat professional, but more social activities has blurred across the years. I quite enjoy it. The last thing about me, or why I'm telling all of this, because I'm gearing up for my big idea, is that because of who I am, right? So I'm from Nigeria. If you haven't noticed, I'm a woman of color. My partner is a woman. She's sitting right there. Embarrass her. I'm accustomed to wearing multiple identities. So I'm never one thing. I'm usually a lot of things at the same time. And in product or design, we are used to holding multiple truths, right? One minute you are uncovering something while you're speaking to a user. The next you've covered something completely contradicting. And that's just kind of my life personally. So I'm used to that. I'm comfortable with that. I'm also used to moving in and out of multiple groups and contexts. And in product, in my role, I have to do that quite a bit. 1 minute I'm speaking to engineers and in the weeds about things. The next minute I have to go 20,000 feet high when I'm speaking to executives. And then complaining about like why delivery can't be faster with a bunch of my peers. So I'm used to kind of shifting context, and that's kind of how I work. And then the rest of it, it's kind of a very similar track here. My identity is contextual, so in 1 minute I could be discussed as part of a group that's underrepresented in technology, as a black woman or as a woman, et cetera. And then another, when talking about transgender people in the workplace, I'm definitely not underrepresented, right? So focusing on the demographics of my life has never yielded quite rich conversation, is more so the experiences. And I see that as a parallel when I'm talking about product. I'm a walking edge case. I'm usually the person that people have forgotten to consider when they're designing spaces. That's fine. I mean, it's not fine, but I'm used to saying it's fine. And that's something that has, I think, honed my empathy for users, right? I know what it's like for people to not have thought of you, to expect that you will move through a system that wasn't designed for you and be okay that it kind of sucks. And so I fight a lot for the edge cases. It pisses the engineers off. But I believe design for inclusion, build for scale. So that's my philosophy. With me still? OK. And just following on that, because I've worn these multiple identities, and just going back to my time in Boston a little bit, so I used to live here, and well, now I live here. I moved back 2 years ago. But the reason I decided to leave Boston the first time was that I was working technology. I thought I was doing a decent job. I felt like I was working probably 4 times as hard as everyone, but for some reason, I just wasn't able to get ahead. I see people nodding. It's a familiar feeling for a lot of us. And that, after a point, became really demoralizing. And I thought, well, if for some reason, right, I'm not able to advance in my career here, get access to more professional development opportunities, bigger projects so I can prove myself, then F it. I'm going to go home, right? So I picked up my bags, and I was supposed to take a year off, go figure out myself, and then move back. And what was supposed to be, just kind of a year off, leaving Boston, turned into multi-year kind of just being roped into different projects, consulting. I started my own business. I was working on go-to-market strategies for tech companies in Africa, and also working on enabling, influencing strategies for impact organizations on the continent. Finally landed in Nigeria. So after spending about a year in South Africa, I landed in Nigeria. And was living the good life. My partner and I were like, you know what, this is great. The weather is awesome. We love the food. We love the music. We're going to live here. Except one thing. Nigeria was not really keen on me being out and part of the LGBT community and running a tech company so visibly and so obnoxiously, as literally one paper put it. So as I became more visible and more successful, the harassment started. I started getting people just cyber stalking me, sending me really rude and inappropriate messages, to the point where I would be speaking at panels, and some people would organize hecklers and or reprinting my bio in the most inappropriate way, and there was a lot of bullying. And I was like, you know what, I can take it, I can live here, I live here, I have a right to be here. And there was something about being fully myself, right, living in a city so that I could inspire other people to do the same. But then at some point, someone threatened my parents, and I was like, okay, no way. So unfortunately, my partner and I decided that it didn't make sense for me to continue to prove a point by living in Nigeria. And I moved back here. So that's just a little bit about me. So you can imagine my just, not surprise per se, but disappointment when I moved back to Boston, right? Leaving my country, my food, I'm going to keep saying my food, my music, my friends, and moving back to Boston, which is, at this point has become kind of a second home to the land where people were accepted and things were supposed to be a lot better. And it was just right around the time when the sexual harassment in Uber exploded. That story exploded. Trump had also announced that he was running for office. It was like the worst time for me to move back to the country. I was like, really, did I really have to pick this moment in time to move back to this city? But here we are, right? And the media was flooded with articles about diversity, tech bro culture, toxicity and management, et cetera, et cetera. And in response, though, the community was trying to address them. So perhaps a little bit because people didn't want to be shamed, perhaps because there were some of us who were like, we can actually do something like this. There was also a flurry of solutions being profiled by the media. So things like Projects Include, which is co-founded by Ellen Pao, who was the VC who sued her firm out in Silicon Valley a couple of years ago. She founded a nonprofit with some other powerhouse ladies to help the VC community talk about diversity and to drive influence of their portfolio companies so they could do better. There was Pipeline Angels, which was taking in, did I drop something? It's just in my mind, okay. There was Pipeline Angels, which was essentially creating the next generation of angel investors. Individual companies, Google, Facebook, were showing their quotas or not and investing in various initiatives to try and improve culture so no one ended up like Uber. I got that message that people were terrified of ending up in the news and having their brands suffer because they didn't have cultures that were working for their team. And then someone said to me, because I was wondering, I was like, I used to live here, and these conversations sound very, very similar to when I used to live here, and why haven't they changed? Why haven't we made any progress? Why am I meeting people older than me who are asking the same questions? They're like, they have not changed. It's been going on for decades. We keep having the same conversation. And someone very dear to me, who may be sitting on the first row, told me that when people keep repeating themselves, especially after you've provided a response, it's usually an indication that they don't feel heard, right? Or the response has not been adequate. And so regardless of the amount of attempts and the trying and the various initiatives, for some reason, we had not been able to crack and even if it's not going to go over way or not, we hadn't made significant enough advances in this area for people to feel like there was hope. And me being just, I was going to describe myself in a very self-deprecating manner. I will not do that because I think people are recording. But me being the sort of person that likes to leave places better than when I entered, I wanted to get a group of people who had these same questions together. I wanted to speak with CEOs and product leaders and designers and diversity and inclusion experts and VCs and anyone who tweeted or wrote about diversity, especially in Boston, right? I wanted to get all those people together in a room and have a discussion. I was curious about what had happened while I was away. I was curious about what was underway, like what they were working on. And I was just had a lot of questions, which happens to me quite often, even as a PM. I learned a ton. And in fact, to help me facilitate these conversations, I probably spoke to at least 100 different people in the span of 4 months. This was like my own passion discovery project, like figure out what's going on with diversity and culture and stuff, specifically in Boston. I made this map, very, very simple map, but it was to enable people to just kind of explain to me where they sat in their organizations, what they were working on. And this started to flesh out as I was speaking to people. So for example, I learned that in companies like that, this is really, really tiny, so I'm not sure you can see. there are teeny little arrows that essentially start all the way from board members that travel all the way down like a waterfall to managers. There are many arrows pointing to HR, people, and culture. And the arrows, if you are receiving an arrow, means that you are being not necessarily told what to do, but you are being driven, right? And so for me, it was kind of an influence map about what was happening in organizations. I mean, there were a couple of interesting things that I learned from this. So one, the fact that there was a lot of focus on HR, but that the people that were writing about terrible cultures and toxicity and sexual harassment were employees. This was talent, right? And the people that were most likely to influence talent in their experiences were managers, but yet there was very, very little engagement from the diversity and inclusion ecosystem with managers. It was always focused on HR. I went to a ton of events about diversity and inclusion and culture. There'll be a bunch of HR people. And I was like, this is great. I know, and and not to minimize HR, but you and I know that you don't really have a lot of power here, right? Like the organization has bubbled up a culture in this very, very organic way. You are responsible for bringing in insights and trends and learnings from outside into the organization. You can offer them. But ultimately, if your leadership doesn't back you, if managers don't adopt what you're bringing in, it doesn't actually impact the employees, right? But we were focusing a lot on them. And there's a ton of stuff. I could talk about this slide forever, but there was a ton of stuff that I learned just from the conversations. But these were the 4 big takeaways for me. One is that when we talk about culture, diversity, inclusion, we've been solving it from the perspective of the companies and not the actual talent, not the individual. When I go back to that other slide, if I may, we can see that, well, if you can't see, I have terrible eyes, but given that the CEO is influenced by media, and media has been doing a lot of writing about diversity and inclusion and essentially shaming people, CEOs are also influenced by other companies, typically their competitors. It's no surprise to me that there's a lot of focus on recruiting and reputational management and the employer brand, et cetera. So that's one thing I learned. And it was like, if we're doing that, that's OK if we're doing it intentionally. But if we're trying to solve this problem from the talent's perspective, then we're missing something. The other thing I learned is that there's a ton of experts. So there are individuals who work at companies, get frustrated, leave. They'll join associations like Latinos in Tech, Blacks in Tech, Women Who Code, et cetera. These are essentially like external ERGs, external employee resource groups, where you can experience camaraderie and commiserate with other people like you. And that's fine. But then they become experts, right, by default about what it's like to build an entire company, an entire culture. And I don't know about you guys. I don't know how many PMs do we have in the room? We're designers. That's fine. Oh, great. We've got a number of people. I really value users' feedback. But listening to them and letting them determine how and what to build in their product is not necessarily like a philosophy I share. But we haven't really discerned the difference, right? We're confusing the testimonies and the experiences of people who have worked in companies where we haven't had ideal circumstances, have not been enabling. And we're confusing that with, this is what you need to do. Someone's complaining, someone's writing, go fix it, go do whatever they're saying that you should do. The other thing is that culture sits with HR, and I don't think it should. I think it's everyone's responsibility, and we've overemphasized that it's one function's responsibility to create an enabling environment in our teams and in our companies. And then the last thing is that the language, this was probably the biggest takeaway for me, the language that we use to talk about culture, diversity, and inclusion today is alienating. And so what I found, which was really inspiring and gave me a lot more hope, is that in my conversations with people, that there are way more advocates and allies in our industry than the media makes it out to be. Honestly, if I read the news and I listen to the terrible, the takedowns of all the companies that are terrible and just tossing vanity metrics in our faces and diversity quotas, et cetera, it might make me reconsider working in this industry. It sounds like I work in the worst industry in the world. But when I'm speaking with people, when I meet folks from startups with 12 people to startups with 500 people, and there are people saying, if I knew what to do, I would do it. Like, I care about this. I don't want people to not feel safe coming to work. I want everyone to thrive here. I was meeting way more people like that, but the reason why they were not engaging is because the language is foreign, right? We use kind of social justice-y language when we're talking about diversity and inclusion. Sometimes it feels like you need to take a critical race theory or women's and gender studies class just to have a conversation. And it's really overwhelming for the technical teams, which honestly is where a lot of the issues are stemming from. Those teams don't speak like that. I think about people literally that I work with today, the kindest, nicest people. They don't talk the way we're talking usually when we're talking about HR or culture, et cetera. So the language itself was alienating. And then as I started to look at these insights, some very clear patterns emerged for me, which is that with the case of solving the company's problem or the talent, the employee's problem, this is a very familiar terrain for me. I work in enterprise. You are constantly trying to balance those two things. So it was like the buyer versus user problem. On the issue of so many experts, right? Everyone knows everything about diversity and inclusion, but somehow we haven't solved the problem. We've got a bunch of people who are really passionate. We've got scholars. We've got executives. We've got a bunch of people. No one is facilitating the conversation in a way that thinks about the entire system and can leverage those people and their insights to move forward in ways that actually help our, oh, I skipped ahead. That's fine. So this is what I think. Product and design leaders are uniquely positioned and equipped to address the tech culture challenges. I really believe that. When I started to see the ways in which the language we were using was alienating, that there are so many different concepts from my daily work, grunt work, that I can apply to help my company and other people's companies understand and see this problem in a different way, in a way that is already familiar to us, right? Like, you shouldn't have to learn about all of these different minority groups and all of these different edge cases. I mean, literally, you will spend the rest of your life reading, studying, and it's really, really difficult for me to swallow this truth that we're trying to perpetuate, which is that for us to be able to create enabling environments for our teams and our coworkers, we need to be PhDs. It's ridiculous. So we already have the tools and the language and the mindset and the motivation to solve this problem for technology. We pride ourselves on being innovators. We solve the world's hardest problems. Every conference is like fight night, right? We come out with music and we're so smart. I mean, and this is, I'm not saying it's the easiest problem, but we solve harder problems every day. And I think that our industry could benefit from our focus on this just a little bit, right? Even if we decided, and now I'm just kind of out there, but even if we decided, hey, we're going to dedicate the next 2 courses, and I'm talking company by company, the product and design team is going to figure out how to solve this problem, right? Better interviews, debiasing recognition programs. I don't know what it is. The tools we have automatically equip us to be able to do so, and we can bring the organizations along because we do that every day. So reason number 1, right? Often without any context, experience, or domain expertise, we're solving hard problems. Like, I know a bunch of people that work in these companies, including myself. And I mean, robotics, payments, international payments, med tech, so people that are deep into, just the sciencey stuff. And the PMs that work there did not have domain experience before they joined. And yet, they're able to advance those companies, solve hard problems, and make amazing things happen. I think the same could apply to this problem. This is one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite leaders, Marty Kagan. It can be dangerous for a product manager to have too much domain expertise. People that have spent a long time building the mastery of one domain often fall into another PM trap, which is believing that they can speak for the target customer and that they are more like their target customer than they actually are. That really resonated with me when I was thinking about this in this way. Because, again, I was thinking of all the people, including myself. At some point, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired. I'm tired of raising my voice a pitch higher so I look less like a scary black woman. I'm tired of the subjective performance reviews. I was tired, right? And when you're tired and you have really strong opinions about what has been blocking you, it's very easy for you to consider, and people will literally say to me, hey, why don't you work in HR? Why don't you start your own diversity and inclusion consulting business? I have resisted for years. I will continue to resist because I believe that as a PM, I can do way more damage, and I can actually impact way more change than working in HR. No offense, HR people, by the way. This is not a rain on HR day. But we've got the tools. We've got the tools to do this. We should do this. Another reason why I believe, or how I've come to my new kind of philosophy is product design lingo is native, more familiar to tech teams than D&I jargon, kind of explaining that the teams that we work with on a regular basis are not talking about gender. I mean, they're not speaking the way we often speak when we talk about these issues in very serious ways, which makes the conversations inaccessible. And leveraging language that we already have, whether it's about understanding the user, checking your assumptions, checking your biases, problem, solution, fit, all of those things can be really powerful tools when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and culture. This is an example. Last year, when I was speaking with different leaders regarding Code Red and the organization I was trying to launch, I came up with this journey map because I wanted to understand where everyone fit. There was a bunch of solutions in Boston. They're like, I train people out of high school. I help companies recruit more women. I am a consultant. There were tech tools, right? There's recruiting tools, and I just wanted to see where they all fit. So a map like this, I created it just out of habit, but it has helped me have much richer conversations about what we could be doing at companies I've worked at, and people are finding them useful as well. And I'm not going to go through the rest of it. These are just examples. If you imagine talent starting at the very beginning. Maybe you're a young girl or a young boy or whatever. And it starts with you understanding that there's technology in the world and that potentially a career in technology is possible. Then you get access to good education, high school training. It could be a boot camp. And then maybe you're possibly recruited or not. Like if you went to a school like mine, you had recruiters show up all the time. If you went to another school, maybe not, right? And so you can start to see people fall off the funnel as you're moving from left to right, left to right. And it just goes on and on and on. But I mean, the point here is that there are frameworks we use, user journey maps, service blueprints, et cetera, that we can help facilitate these conversations in our companies in a way that it just doesn't resolve, just kind of depreciate into your opinion against my opinion, but more like creating shared frameworks so we can have that conversation. I'm going to skip through these. These are just examples. The other one is that, and I think this is really important, we are trained as designers and product leaders to be mindful of the power dynamics that influence feedback. I love Janae's talk and that she actually brought feedback into the talk about the power dynamic between a user or someone in the company saying, this place sucks, right? And maybe not choosing, not being able to feel safe doing so because you don't want to lose your job. And so it's very, very hard for organizations to get feedback. And I believe that's a hard problem. That's an interesting problem we could help them solve. And we're also trained at testing assumptions, right? So again, another example of, and this is a tool that I use at work, it's the opportunity tree. It takes your desired outcome. You think about the opportunities, which should be informed by insights or data. You figure out solutions, or you ideate solutions, and then you go test your biases and your assumptions to make sure that they're viable before you go beg engineering to build them. So, and this is another example. These are going to be available after, so you can go wild with the slides. They're just examples. Yeah, and this is another example about, I love this one because I terrorize my own company with these frameworks, by the way. And the whole point is if you've got ideas for how to advance culture in your company, thinking about the effort impact and then deciding essentially your roadmap for how to advance those things can be very, very helpful because most people, the big challenge is I don't know where to start. OK, and then the final one, which I don't think I need to convince you guys on because we already had that talk in the beginning, is that when we don't engage regarding culture or diversity in our teams, we put our products and we put our users at risk. How many people have read this book? Oh my God, I just made your Monday. You should go read this book. It's the most, I read it I think in 2 weekends. It's really funny. It's written by a content writer who moved to Silicon Valley to be a writer and then ended up working in technology. She has a ton of stories about serious tech fails, but in a very humorous way, but in a smart way that illuminates the power of the decisions that we are making every day, and why it's really important that not just that we are great professionals as product people, as design people, but that we play a role in helping our companies facilitate this conversation in a smarter way. Yeah, so one more time. Product and design leaders are uniquely positioned to help the tech industry address its culture challenges, and that's us. Like, I really believe that the people in this room, and it's why I jumped at the opportunity to speak to you guys, that because we already have the tools to do this, that we are the people that could play a huge role in helping our companies facilitate these conversations internally, and that we can actually do more than kind of be, bystanders while we're watching the industry go up in flames, literally. So with that said, the what now, and I'm sure the slides will be available afterwards. I'm planning a couple of design sprint series in Boston, like bringing together designers and product leaders from around the state, but if you'd like to come from out of state, that's great too. And I'm looking for volunteer companies who incubate ideas. I'm looking for volunteer product and design leaders, obviously. An advisory team. If you care about this and you've got strong thoughts, you've built cultures in different companies, and you'd want to lend your support in any way, please come talk to me after the talk. The real voyage of discovery comes not in seeking new landscape, but in having new eyes. This is a problem that I think we're all very familiar with. We've tried a bunch of different ways to make progress in this problem in improving our cultures, et cetera. Let's try this one. Thank you.